Ever since the 3-episode premiere of Ironheart on Disney Plus by both Marvel Studios and the Disney Company, we have seen a lot of Marvel fans expressing their opinions about this series, and already we know that Disney CEO Bob Iger, Marvel boss Kevin Feige, even the star of the series, Dominque Thorne, they are already going into full-on damage control over the series and really focusing way too much on diversity, equity, and inclusion instead of the actual story itself. This is Mike Zero. Subscribe if you're new and like this video to see future updates. You can also follow me at Mike01. I thank you also very much for the great and kind support. Now, one thing about Ironheart is that we already know that this is not only a show that nobody asked for, but it's also a show based on a comic book that was actually canceled back in 2016. It really didn't last all that long. And when you look at the overall comparisons, if you actually watch the 3 episodes, there are similarities to Iron Man 3 elements in there. There are moments in the actual series that actually copies and actually takes some characteristics of Tony Stark into Iron Man 3. We'll talk more about that in the coming moments, but what's interesting here about all of this is that one thing about Dominque Thorne is that she constantly focuses on how this is the most diversified series yet, and how it's the first show that implements LGBTQ members into the actual cast. Now, what's interesting here is that, yet again, we already know that Marvel is going through a lot of other consequences based on the whole focus on DEI, right? They've been dealing with a lot of Marvel fans, dialing back on Disney Plus and focusing more on other brands out there. However, what's interesting about this is that with both the Walt Disney Company and Marvel Studios scrambling to engage in damage control over the Ironheart series after its 3-episode premiere on Disney Plus, already actress Dominque Thorne is beginning to go off the rails in the midst of the Ironheart ratings disaster that's taking place after Disney goes all out with their agenda. Now, Thorne delivered the following. Well, what's great about this series is that we address the growing issues between those that have nothing and those that come from a place of privilege. You are going to see this between my character Riri and a new character that we wanted to introduce as Joe, and how there is this major twist that connects to the past Iron Man films. Looking back at the first Iron Man and what Tony had to go through and the contrast between him and what Riri go through, I don't think that there is a similar comparison there at all, because Riri deals with more internal conflicts than Tony ever did. I think what makes her the next Tony Stark for sure is that she holds similar issues to Tony in the personal sense. She has panic attacks and she struggles with that and other obstacles. But beyond that comparison of Riri and Tony is that this is a show that celebrates trans rights and how it was important for us at Marvel to have a diverse cast, whether they are trans or embracing drag, or how we had to connect Riri to the LGBTQ community. It was a very rewarding experience to work with members of the LGBTQ community, both as part of the cast and the characters they got to play. And this needs to be respected from the audience more nowadays, because we are living in a time where members of this community are mocked and rejected, so it was like a breath of fresh air when Kevin Feige came up to me and said, we are going to not only make this the most diversified series, but that this will be the first series to do it directly without hiding or putting those characters to the wayside. Our great members of the LGBTQ community got that chance, and I think you see this with the characters like Slug. Slug, I think, is going to connect with so many people, especially those coming from the LGBTQ community. When I got a chance to speak with Robert Downey Jr. about the evolution in the Marvel Universe, he was clapping his hands to what we were aiming to do in the show, and embracing DEI. I think Marvel fans just need to get a grip already and stop obsessing over characters that come from the LGBTQ community and how they are considered main roles now in the MCU. Now guys, let me just stop here, because when you're focusing way too much, and I mean way too much, on the agenda, you know, I already lost count on how many times she said LGBTQ there. But when you're focusing on the typical messaging and not really focusing on the actual story, that's when people are just, you know, logging out. They're tuning out. They are calling it quits. They don't want to deal with this anymore. They don't want to deal with the typical Disney agenda anymore. And look, I think a lot of this has a lot to do with the fact that, yes, this is a series that they originally wanted to put out, I believe it was back in 2023. They kept on delaying this series, you know, every 6 months after the other, and it just never happened until now. just now. It comes out in June of 2025. And if you look at the actual show, there are similarities. I will admit, there are similarities to Iron Man 3, to Tony Stark. You know, she does deal with panic attacks. She does, of course, have a moment in the show. I won't really spoil it yet, but there is a moment in the show where it kind of does contrast Tony's moment in Iron Man 3, where he kind of falls down to the ground, his suit is destroyed, he meets up with a younger person. I won't go into the actual specifics about that, but what's interesting about this is that there's also a lot of other things going on with the character Joe. Now, we'll talk more about that in a moment, but what's interesting about this, yet again, is the fact that she's focusing on the agenda. Notice that. She's focusing on the agenda and not the actual story, because, well, if you really look at it really on a deeper level, there really isn't much of a story in this show. I think that a lot of people will agree with the fact that episodes 1 through 3 were premiered on day 1 because they really have nothing to tell when it comes to the overall grand element of the story. That's exactly why they're doing 2 release dates instead of, 6 release dates. So she goes on to actually conclude, it's this type of behavior that complicated things over at Marvel and only made things harder for the fine cast and crew, not just for this project, but for others that they have been trying to put together. Kevin is a wide supporter of DEI and holds no plans to step down from that support. It's a beautiful thing and should sometimes be the bigger focus than the story itself, because it allows you to properly cast roles and connect with more people around the world. To me, that is a fantastic business model to actually reach out to more people and to connect with others. So again, I would love to hear everyone's opinion on Ironheart, episodes 1 through 3, if you guys got a chance to go ahead and see it, to really kind of get a grasp on what's really going on here between Ironheart and the comparison to Tony Stark and Iron Man. Because look, we all know this. We all know that nobody was asking for this show, and already we know a lot of people are labeling this as the worst MCU series yet. This is exactly why Disney Plus is creatively bankrupt. They always have to piggyback on the aesthetics of past characters or something around those lines, and to really compare it to the older characters and make the newer ones better, or to set themselves up as better, for in this case, than Tony Stark, right? They keep going on that constant trope, and it's a little hypocritical in a way, because there's lines of dialogue in the show where, we have Riri Williams saying things like, oh, I don't want to really talk trash about Tony Stark just yet, but again, the fact that they're focusing on DEI elements, they're focusing on the agenda, they're focusing on characters that have privilege and those that do not come from a place of privilege, it's just this exhausting, constant narrative that people want to get away from. And Disney just can't seem to find any route in 2025 to let go of that. And look, I think that when we have the next batch of episodes debut on July 1st, you're going to have this major villain reveal, and I think that you all know who I'm talking about. One thing about that is the fact that it does kind of have a comparison to the Acolyte series and how that actually had Darth Plagueis debut in the later half of that show. But overall, I would like to hear what everyone has to say about this below in the comments, and if you guys did enjoy the content for today, make sure to drop a thumbs up on this video to support the channel, and I will catch you guys later.